Hello and welcome back to the UK SIF Leadership Podcast. It is April 2024. I'm Liza Hartley, Media Manager at UK SIF, and on today's podcast we will be looking at the sustainability challenges facing the UK's transport sector. We at UK SIF have just published the third report in our four-part Financing the Future series, looking at the state of green investment into the UK's transport industry from freight decarbonisation to EV infrastructure to gigafactories. With me is Head of Policy and Regulatory Affairs at UK SIF, Warwick Thompson. Oscar, good afternoon.
Hi, Liza.
And today we're hugely fortunate to be joined by Ben Nelmes, CEO of New AutoMotive. Ben co-founded New AutoMotive in 2020, where he set out to increase the pace of the clean energy transition. 4 years on, and New AutoMotive is using data to help the public make informed choices and pushing for policy that supports the switch to electric vehicles. Ben, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. You put it much better than I could.
It's always funny having somebody sort of read out your mini CV, isn't it? Great. Well, thank you both for being here. Let's kick off with a look at the big picture. So the UK transport sector is lagging behind. Alongside being the biggest emitter, the biggest emitting sector, it's responsible for 26% of the UK's total emissions. UK transport companies are falling behind in net zero goals compared to other sectors. So our recent research shows that only 32% of UK transport companies expect to meet their intermediary 2030 targets. That's less than a third. So how do we bridge the gap and accelerate decarbonisation? Oscar, perhaps we can start with you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Liza. Yeah, really looking forward to this discussion with you and Ben. I suppose at a very kind of high level, something that we observe in terms of the transport sector, and I guess let's be clear, in this report we're really talking about surface transport sector, is I guess this lack of clear public policy signals to help give that confidence to investors and industry to invest for the long term. Our members represents in total 19 trillion in global assets under management, and they really do rely on those long-term clear policy signals from the UK government and regulators. So yeah, I think initial observation that I have, and that goes throughout the report, is those clearer signals from policymakers that can really give some certainty over the transport sector's decarbonisation pathway. We've seen mixed signals from UK policymakers in the last few months, and that's been a concern to us and investors that we represent. So yeah, we wrote a letter alongside other investor organisations and some of our members, and this was to the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak when he made that headline announcement to delay the phase-out date for the sale of new ICE, internal combustion engine vehicles. So yeah, we wrote a letter with some strong concerns there. And I think this really has impacted the confidence investors and businesses in that part of the transport sector. There's a figure from the Association for Renewable Energy and Clean Technology that we cite in our report, and that says that a delay to the phase-out date for internal combustion engine vehicles may cost the UK £100 million in total in terms of investment for the automotive sector. So yeah, this lack of certainty is certainly not helping the investment case when it comes to EV and some of the supporting charging infrastructure around it. I think linked to that, there is a need to address the significant financing gaps that the Climate Change Committee and other groups have identified. So I think the CCC has said that £140 billion in total investment will be needed to decarbonise road transport. Obviously, that's a huge figure. A lot of that will need to come from UK sub-members and others in the private finance industry. So yeah, how do we? What's the role of policy, I suppose, in helping unlock some of those capital flows? We're seeing other countries that are taking steps more broadly to support the growth of the low carbon economy, whether it's the United States through IRA, markets in Asia and the EU as well. So yeah, how do we get those kind of clearer signals to market participants? I won't go into all of the areas of the report, but just very briefly for now, those areas where we do call for more certainty, we talk about reinstating the 2030 ICE vehicle target and making sure that aligns with the ZEV mandate as well. We also talk about accelerating the rollout of EV charging infrastructure as well through a new bill to be considered in Parliament. We also talk about investment in gigafactories, and that's really about boosting the UK's battery manufacturing and assisting in the decarbonisation of transport. And then we touch a little bit on, in our report also, around some of those kind of harder areas of transport as well. So we talk about a decarbonisation strategy for freight, for example. So yeah, I'll leave it there for now, and happy to go into more details, Liza, on the specifics within the report.
Thank you, Oscar. Ben, I'd like to get your reaction to that and to some of the questions there.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think it's a real shame that transport is lagging so much. It's one of the biggest emitting sectors, and represents a huge opportunity really for climate policy. There's lots of research showing that if you're generating lots more clean power, as the UK is, the best thing you can do with that power is use it to electrify transport. That's where you get the biggest emissions reductions. It's also where you secure some of the biggest co-benefits of net zero, so huge cost savings for consumers and businesses. Inflation's been a big problem in the economy in the UK, and rapidly decarbonising road transport can help be part of the solution there. But also air pollution in our towns and cities. People need cities where they can move and they can breathe, and electric vehicles have a really key role to play in that. So, it's a shame to see it lagging behind, and I think whoever forms the next government in the UK is going to have to make this a big priority in their climate policy.
Great. Okay, super. I think we're gonna dig into a few of the points we've just made there a little bit more. Moving on, our report that we've just put out highlights a potential loss of millions and possibly billions, so due to companies that are looking to move investments overseas due to some of the issues that Oscar and Ben, you've both highlighted just now. So we can say that 57% of major transport companies are considering moving their investments elsewhere. The specific wording is that they already have or they are considering moving those investments to places more favourable to their sustainability goals. Ben, if I can start with you, what are you seeing at New Automotive? How can the UK become more attractive to investors in sustainable transport?
Yeah, it's a very mixed picture, and I think, to me, when I read this report, this was the most alarming finding, really, and I think it reflects a feeling that is widespread in the automotive industry, and particularly amongst those who are trying to move quickly to produce more batteries or decarbonise their vehicle fleets, which is that there are a lot of mixed signals coming from government, and that is just very damaging. Some of the moves we had last year around the delaying of the headline phase-out date for sales of new petrol and diesel cars and vans, that sent a really bad signal about the UK. So it's the red lights are flashing, and this is a sign of it, really.
Oscar.
Yeah, I think I agree with many of Ben's points there. And I guess that's borne out in the kind of evidence that we've got. And for us, being evidence-based in our policies is really important. Yes, we do feel we need to dial up the rhetoric with government, but let's not do it for the sake of criticising and taking political cheap shots. So yeah, we're really keen to have evidence at the heart of our policy, and that's why we've done these surveys with industry leaders across the transport sector. So yeah, we surveyed, I believe it was 100 large listed and unlisted companies. So yeah, the stat you mentioned, Liza, in terms of 50% of those major transport companies considering moving their investments elsewhere to other jurisdictions, that certainly is damaging. And I think hopefully that gives the evidence base to what we're saying, what other groups are saying, what Ben's organisation is saying, and lends credibility to some of those that critique of policymakers, I suppose. In terms of, I guess, moving away from that kind of evidence base that we've prepared towards some of the kind of details of the report in terms of the recommendations. In the report, we set out a series of either, I guess you could call low-cost or no-cost policy and reg changes to help attract greater amounts of capital towards the transport sector. So yeah, Ben and I have talked about already of the need to reinstate the ICE vehicle 2030 phase-out date. That's really important. Going back to our points around evidence, the stat we have there that came out of our report that's been published says that over half of UK transport businesses are optimistic that reinstating that 2030 phase-out target and actually aligning that with the ZEV mandate would have a positive impact in terms of companies investing in sustainable transportation in the UK. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting finding there, and it shows that industry, the automotive industry, and our members, investors want to see this clarity. And want to see the reinstatement of that phase-out date. I think also really key ask that we have in our report is around boosting the installation of charging infrastructure across the road network as well. We talk about this need for an EV infrastructure bill. Interestingly, 75% almost of transport companies that we surveyed said that introducing this specific bill would have a positive impact on their investment in sustainable transport in the UK. And for us, the bill is really important to improve the scale and distribution of charging points across the country and try to avoid some of those blackout points that we see in certain areas. Other things we talk about in the report around a national scrappage scheme to support individuals in the transition to EVs, incentivize take-up among different groups, really aims at creating that market for second-hand EVs in the UK in future. We have an ask around promoting investment in gigafactories as well. So we really want to see a more transparent, consistent approach to gigafactory investment in the UK. So, for example, seeing clear investment plans that are communicated from UK policymakers in the form of investment prospectuses is really important. A stat that we noted from the report it said that over 90% of large UK transport firms said to us that they'd welcome a more transparent, consistent approach to gigafactory investment in the UK. Again, a really powerful result from our survey. Maybe one final area to look at that we mentioned in our report is around a decarbonisation strategy for freight, which I believe the government has already committed to. So that's about getting on with it and delivering on what government said there. We want to see that strategy really focus on HGVs. And also larger vehicles as well, which are very high emitting at this point in time. I think there are kind of specific challenges facing HGVs and large vehicles that we might touch on in our conversation. So how do we reduce the high upfront cost of low emissions trucks and electric trucks? How do we rebuild and instill confidence in the infrastructure to help enable these low emission vehicles to recharge? And there's some questions around technology and the technological pathways there as well.
Right.
That's the sort of some of the negative statistics that we talked about, but there are positives as well. So maybe one final stat, if I may, Liza, if you'll oblige me.
Please.
The one really interesting stat that's has that kind of positive framing. It says that basically nearly all of the businesses that we surveyed, so that's 100 large transport companies, nearly all of them surveyed, and that represents an estimated £150 billion in turnover, invested in sustainable transportation UK, said that they would be willing to increase their investments in sustainable projects in the UK if a favourable policy environment was implemented. So it just shows the opportunities are there.
Yeah.
We just need to really get that certainty over the decarbonisation pathway and address some of the challenges that we've all talked about so far.
Great. I'm just wondering, for our listeners, for the benefit of our listeners who perhaps maybe don't know this space super well, could anybody explain, is it ZEVs or ZEV?
It's
Ben, you can enlighten our listeners.
Sure, zero emission vehicles, and how you say it is very much up to you. You can go for the mouthful,
sure,
or you can use the acronym. People talk about ZEVs or EVs sometimes, but yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much. Super. All right, let's discuss one of the biggest challenges to the UK's EV market or ZEV market, whatever you prefer, in recent years. So that was a decision that really rocked the EV market in the UK for both investors and manufacturers alike. And that was the September 2023 rollback of the internal combustion engine, or we've called them ICE vehicles, phase-out plan. We've referred to that already a little bit. Would assume that everybody who's listening to this does know that happened. That was an announcement by Rishi Sunak in September 2023. So Ben, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what happened, any of the impacts that you've seen. What has this done to the EV industry in the UK since then?
Well, so there's good news and there was bad news. I mean, it was bad to see the Prime Minister sending a signal that he wanted to delay the arrival of this new technology in the UK, when certainly from the perspective of motorists and the environment and the economy, there are really only benefits to having more electric vehicles on Britain's road in greater number sooner. So that was a shame, but there is it wasn't quite as bad as I think is often perceived to be the case, and that's because of a little known policy called the Zero Emissions Vehicle Mandate, which I think Oscar mentioned earlier. And this is a policy that is a product of the Climate Change Act in the UK, and it sets binding targets on car manufacturers to sell a growing number of electric vehicles or zero emissions vehicles as a proportion of their car sales between now and 2030. And a little bit like the renewables obligation did for wind and solar in the UK, it's a scheme that's designed to employ a mixture of carrots and sticks. So car manufacturers that are slow to sell more EVs, they get hit with a penalty, and they have to subsidise the sale of EVs by their competitors who are selling much more of the vehicles. So it creates some very powerful signals for the car manufacturing industry. And we are really starting to see those feed through into the vehicle sales data. So the policy came into force in January, and we saw, for example, Toyota, a manufacturer who barely sold an electric car in the UK, go from selling almost none to 20% of its new cars being fully electric.
Wow.
In the course of a month. So these policies shift the market very, very quickly, and and shift the dial very quickly. So it's really good that that policy is still in place, and it didn't get changed as a result of Rishi Sunak's announcement. So there was some regrettable stuff in September last year, but there was some good stuff as well. I would say those who watch the data very carefully around UK car sales every month, as we do, they will have noticed that in the last 6 months there has been a slackening off in the growth of EV sales in the UK. A lot of that is down to some of the changes around the rules of origin that govern the sale of electric vehicles manufactured in Europe and then brought into the UK. So they were due to be hit with a 20% tariff from the 1st of January. And that change, which was due to come into force, was only abandoned very late in December. And that really severely disrupted vehicle supply to the UK. And we're still seeing the impacts of that filter through in the monthly sales data. But I'm very confident in the second half of this year, we should see EV sales really grow very strongly and get back on course. So I'm optimistic about particularly cars and vans where these policies exist. But of course, as Oscar says, there's no policy like this yet for HGVs, which is a really important sector too.
Okay, an important area of oversight. Can we discuss EV infrastructure? I am, of course, mostly talking about charging points, but I would love to know if there are other sort of key areas that you would go, no, don't forget that. Ben, what do you see as the current state of EV infrastructure in the UK, and where do you think the key challenges lie?
The position with EV infrastructure is actually that it's really hard to say how well we are doing. So if you speak to some EV drivers, they will point out some of the shortcomings in the network as it exists today, and those are definitely real and they definitely exist. However, it's also true to say that there is no current evidence that I'm aware of that shows that areas with more EV public charging infrastructure have a higher rate of uptake of EVs. That's right. For the simple reason that most people who buy an EV will charge it at home on their driveway. So I think sometimes we can get a little bit distracted by the challenge of EV infrastructure. Yes, it is a big challenge and we have to build a lot of it. But actually, lots of people are going to use it very rarely, only on the occasional long trip, perhaps on the summer holidays when they're driving to Cornwall. So I think EV infrastructure is a problem that it will be solved ultimately. And for some people, the lack of reliable, fast charging infrastructure at motorway service stations will put people off. That's okay. I'm content for people for whom EVs are a practical option at the moment to be the first to buy the cars. I think that's fine. We've got 33 million cars on the road. It's going to take a very long time to electrify all of them. So let's start with the people where it works already.
Okay, sure. And then sort of thereafter, the idea is make them available to people who, for example, don't have driveways.
That's exactly right. And I think ultimately, the government will have a role in solving this problem, but it will be our wallets that determine where the charge points go, and market forces that determine where's a good place to put a charge point and where's a bad place to put a charge point.
Sure.
And you don't want government getting too involved to the point where they start forcing the installation of charge points that are then no longer going to be used because they will be stranded assets.
Sure. So
it's a really difficult challenge for governments to solve. There's a chicken and egg problem in the market in that there aren't enough customers to produce a price signal for charge point installers. But equally, we have some areas where there are really reluctant local authorities who are not putting the infrastructure in that they are ultimately going to need. So it's a very complicated problem, and I think central and local government is finding it very challenging.
Right. Oscar, can I bring you in on that?
Yeah, absolutely. We do talk about the role of local authorities and local councils in our report because, I think, as you say, it needs a whole of government approach, working with the charge point operators, the auto sector, investors and local councils as well. So, we talk in our report around a bit more support for local councils to support them with the installation of off-street charging points. And also, to the point around the kind of the black spots that we see, also working with councils to focus on addressing some of the areas of unequal coverage in terms of our infrastructure between local councils. There's of course the question of where do we prioritise funding? Do we need to be more strategic as the UK in terms of prioritising existing pots rather than always spending more money, which we don't have at this point in time. So yeah, we're careful when we talk to policymakers about that in our ask. So yeah, is there a case to prioritise funding on those areas with the overall kind of weaker charging infrastructure coverage in place? And what's the role in terms of local councils? There might be some existing policies in place, is my understanding, in terms of how local councils can apply for funding for charging points from government, but perhaps that needs to be a little bit clearer. It's something that we hear from members, some perhaps getting clearer guidelines to councils in place for those councils in particular that we understand and here don't actually take up central government funding on certain occasions. There are other issues as well that Ben's touched on. For sure, there's the demand side as well, which we address in our report. So we talk about the national scrappage scheme, for example, because for sure, this is not necessarily just the supply of EVs. At least at this point of time, it is really the demand side as well. So yeah, the report we talk about a national scrappage scheme and also other incentives to really help individuals make that transition to EVs, particularly when the financial cost of an EV remains really, really high. And I suppose, there are kind of cultural challenges as well and misconceptions. I'm not sure it's an area that UK CIF will get involved in, but I will kind of, pass the buck to others, perhaps even Ben, to look at those issues. I guess there's wider cultural factors in terms of, how long exactly does a battery charge on the typical EV? What's the range exactly? Because I think there is a bit of misinformation and cultural attitudes that need to be looked at by all different groups. I guess another point that I don't think we mentioned in the report is, what are the standards in place for those existing EV charging station operators? Are the standards high enough for those participants? There is a point around, a number of these operators are fossil fuel companies, and is there that conflict of interest in terms of making sure that the standards are in place? I'll kind of throw that into the debate as well without going necessarily too further. One other point to draw on as well, if I may, is around grid connectivity and planning for EV chargers. So making sure that EV batteries are connected to the grid can be challenging, and I think if we can get EVs better connected, that will be a real help. And decarbonisation of the grid, more generally, is really key to support the quicker deployment of EV charging infrastructure. And there's loads that we say on grid connectivity and planning and permitting for renewables in our first report as part of our Financing the Future series on energy.
Lovely. Let's talk batteries and gigafactories. Gigafactories, a word that I think we've all suddenly started hearing lots and lots in the last few years, but actually prior to that hadn't heard whatsoever. So the House of Commons Business and Trade Committee has cautioned that the government has failed to grasp the extent of current policy gaps in relation to gigafactories and continues to emphasise the need for a long-term vision and clear action plan to improve battery manufacturing capacity. First up, Ben, what's at stake here?
Well, it's a huge amount at stake. I mean, Britain's automotive industry is one of our key manufacturing industries that it's multi-billion pound in terms of its GVA, and it's also one of our key exports. So making sure that we can transition that industry to producing batteries, which are the biggest, most valuable element of an electric car, it's going to be a big transition, and it's going to require government to play quite an active role to bring it about. We have had some good announcements recently about EV investment. I mean, it's there certainly is more that we could hope for in terms of Britain's battery manufacturing than is currently kind of on the cards. But there are some good things happening in British battery manufacturing, and I think with the government playing the right role and making sure that the policy is in place, I think we can certainly, Britain has the right economy, the right workforce, good access to lots of electricity, which is what you need to produce batteries. There's no reason we can't succeed in this area. I'm hopeful that we will, but we need to see a bit more of a plan and a bit more of a detailed strategy than the government has so far put out there.
I have a suspicion Oscar might agree.
Yeah, it's just nodding my head there to those comments. I think, it's right to say, we have moved too slowly in terms of encouraging the domestic battery manufacturing industry in the UK and gigafactories. Other countries have moved much more quickly, the US and markets in Asia and elsewhere as well. So, we are very far behind, but let's at least try and get up those rankings. Let's try at least be competitive in this space for the reasons that Ben has just mentioned. So in our report we have two main policy asks in that. we talk about the need for government to produce an investment prospectus, for identified sites, and these would set out the key opportunities in terms of investment and also the level of support that investors can expect the government to provide. So yeah, that's a really key ask that we have in our report. A second key ask is around targeting locations of those gigafactories as well, particularly focusing on those areas of the UK where skilled workforces already exist, whether that's in the energy, automotive industry or related industries, or may have this potential as well. So yeah, again, it's that strategic approach that we really want to see from government working together with industry. So yeah, those are kind of two key asks that we have from our report there. And yeah, we really want to see some movement on that in due course.
Lovely. If I can ask for a bit of an expansion, Oscar, when it comes to public-private engagements on this scale, the scale of something like a gigafactory, what specific changes are needed to improve investor confidence there?
Yeah, so I suppose, Liza, it kind of goes to probably the two recommendations that we have before. So right. I think the investment prospectuses recommendation we have in terms of identified sites for gigafactories is really important. The government, to their credit, and it's important, to point out where government does sometimes get it right, not just where they get it wrong.
Sure.
So yeah, they had the subsidy arrangement for Tata Group to build a gigafactory in the UK. I think that was in last year. And there are other similar subsidies that have been provided as well. So, that's something that's UK CIF we support, but it wasn't really clear to us and others like how this subsidy agreement was actually reached. And I think getting a bit more transparency in place is really important. So, investors and businesses can actually identify, what were the reasons why this agreement was completed, a bit more transparency around that, and I think that can help support the investment landscape. In terms of the kind of second ask that we've spoken around in terms of targeting the locations for gigafactories, where there are kind of skilled workers in place, we think that is really important and a kind of a really key missing piece. We know that the UK's own battery strategy has said that we need to identify and facilitate the skills needed for the battery sector, but actually in that strategy itself, it doesn't make too many references to targeting those locations where those skills may already be thriving. So yeah, let's think about what we're already good at and harnessing that to drive the change we want to see when we're talking about investment in gigafactories. So in terms of a bit more specifics, we talk about some of the regions we talk about are around Scotland, specifically Aberdeen, and also we reference the West Midlands, such as Coventry, and also the North East as well.
Lovely. Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting area, isn't it? Thinking about, it brings us on to the big questions of the just transition, right? As how do we make use of the great skills and expertise that we have at the moment, but also I think there's a stat that we quote in our report about in 2022, the numbers of actual skilled technicians in the UK who were qualified to work safely on EVs was actually at around 11%. So, I mean, that was 2022, we're 2024 now, but there's clearly a lot of progress and upskilling that needs to be done. I need to change direction just slightly because I'm aware we're coming towards time. So I want to talk about freight. I think, so collectively, freight transport encompassing road, rail, maritime represents nearly 7% of UK carbon emissions. And that number continues to rise, not only as other sectors that are slightly easier to decarbonise more quickly, but also in real terms driven by the growing e-commerce sector. Now, road freight decarbonisation in particular has an estimated transition cost of around £20 billion for the UK, which includes fleet cost and on-land infrastructure such as charging and refuelling stations, smart grids and updated road infrastructure. So we've clearly got a big challenge here. Where are we up to at the moment and how do we make progress? Perhaps, Ben, if you can jump in here.
Well, it'd be helpful if the government had a policy, I suppose. Well, so we have a headline ambition to get to phase out sales of polluting HGVs by a particular date, but we don't have a policy that is implemented to bring that about. And actually, this is an area where Britain is potentially falling behind. Europe does have a policy. The European Commission is pressing ahead and is introducing an emissions performance standard for HGVs. It would make sense, given that Britain has a zero emissions vehicle mandate for cars and for vans, for us to have one for HGVs in the future. But it doesn't appear to be moving in that direction. And of course, chances of something happening between now and the next general election are fairly slim. So it does look like we're not going to have any supportive policy in this area for some time. So it's the outlook's a bit bleak, really. I mean, we need to see some real action in this space.
Concerning. Oscar, perhaps you can jump in here with something. I think we've touched on a pretty crucial point.
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to talk about, what do we do to address the challenges that Ben's just articulated.
Yeah.
I suppose to build on your comments, Liza, in terms of why this matters, freight and logistics sector, is a really important part of the economy. The figure I've got to hand is that it contributed to £127 billion in 2022, and overall represents a large amount of our transport emissions. So that's why we've chosen to address this part of the transport sector in our report, and why we really want to see some action. In terms of the recommendations that we propose in our report, we call for the publication of a long-term freight decarbonisation strategy, and that would include detailed freight transition targets as part of that. And in terms of the strategy itself, we want to see a focus on HGVs and larger vehicles to really deliver a lot more certainty and unlock investments in the new technologies that can assist with their decarbonisation pathway. More specifically, in terms of the strategy itself, we talk about including a commitment to maintain the 2040 target on ending the sale of new petrol and diesel HGVs, and perhaps we even ratchet up the ambition of those targets, as technology and the infrastructure and demand for these types of vehicles improves in the economy in time. We also talk a little bit around the expected technological pathways for HGVs. Identifying the right technological solutions for HGVs and trucks is complicated, and technology, I guess, does seem to be quite nascent at the moment. So how do we get clarity in terms of the technological pathways for HGVs? And that's something that we want to see happen. And we mentioned it in our report. How could the UK be in a leadership position when it comes to decarbonising HGVs, and trucks in the years ahead?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there is I think there's probably the clarity around the technology on HGVs. Just to pick up on that point, Oscar, it's evolving day by day, and we do see electric HGVs being registered these days in small number, but they are beginning. And the UK has a great opportunity here because we're a relatively small island. We don't need to move that freight particularly far, so range is not that much of an issue. And of course, the freight industry is heavily driven by the total cost of ownership of the vehicles, and that is already starting to look favourable. So we could see it move quite quickly, but I do think it does need that initial nudge from government to get things underway, so that we start to get more electric HGVs on the road.
And with that, we have reached the end of our time. Thank you both so much for your insights. I think particular thanks to you, Ben, for joining us as our guest. We've been so fortunate to have your expertise. The Transport Report can now be found on the UK SIF website on our policy page. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. Remember to like and subscribe for more episodes and UK SIF news. You can find us on LinkedIn or Twitter at UK SIF. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. You'll hear from us again very soon.
Thanks, Liza.
Thanks.